Hello, I'm Sarah, and if you're new here, I'm an ex-Amish girl who left the community about 6 years ago. I make these videos to help people understand what life was really like growing up Amish and to answer the questions that so many of you have. Today, I'm answering a question from one of my subscribers, Margaret Craigie, who asked, do Amish go to the doctor for other illnesses, like a UTI, or is this considered God's will as well? Margaret, this is such a great question, and honestly, it's one that a lot of people misunderstand about the Amish. So let me break this down for you based on my own experience growing up in an old order Amish community in Pennsylvania. First thing I want to clear up right away is that yes, the Amish do go to doctors. They absolutely do. But it's complicated, and it's not as simple as just picking up the phone and making an appointment like most people do. There are a lot of factors that go into when and why an Amish person seeks medical care, and it varies quite a bit depending on which community you're talking about. See, not all Amish communities are the same. There are Old Order Amish, New Order Amish, Swartzentruber Amish, and several other groups, and they all have different rules about healthcare. The community I grew up in was Old Order, which is kind of middle of the road when it comes to how strict they are. The Swartzentruber Amish are much more conservative and resistant to modern medicine, while New Order Amish are generally more open to it. In my community, going to the doctor wasn't forbidden, but it also wasn't the first thing people did when they got sick. Let me explain how it usually worked. If someone got sick with something minor, like a cold or a stomach bug, the first step was always home remedies. My mom had this whole cabinet full of herbs, tinctures, and natural medicines. We used elderberry syrup for immune support, peppermint tea for stomach issues, and chamomile for just about everything else. A lot of Amish women have these recipe books passed down through generations that have remedies for all kinds of ailments. For something like a urinary tract infection, which Margaret specifically asked about, most Amish women I knew would first try cranberry juice or cranberry supplements. They'd drink tons of water and maybe use some herbal remedies. My aunt swore by this mixture of apple cider vinegar and honey in warm water. Now, did these things always work? No, not really. UTIs are bacterial infections, and they usually need antibiotics. But the mindset was always to try the natural route first. Here's where it gets tricky, though. If the home remedies didn't work and the person was getting worse, then yes, they would go to a doctor. But there was often a delay. Sometimes that delay was just a day or two, but other times it could be a week or more. And that delay wasn't usually because they thought it was God's will to suffer. It was more about a combination of things: the cost of healthcare, the inconvenience of getting to a doctor without a car, and a general distrust of modern medicine that's pretty deeply ingrained in the culture. Let me talk about the cost first, because this is huge. The Amish don't have health insurance. They don't believe in insurance because it's seen as not trusting in God's provision and relying on the outside world. Instead, they have what's called church aid. When someone has a big medical expense, the community comes together to help pay for it. There might be fundraisers, auctions, or just collections taken up. But even with that system, medical care is expensive, and there's always this pressure not to be a burden on the community. So if you're an Amish woman with a UTI, you're thinking about the fact that going to the doctor might cost $100 or more just for the visit, plus the cost of antibiotics, plus the cost of hiring a driver to take you there. And you're thinking, maybe I can just tough it out, maybe the cranberry juice will work, maybe it'll go away on its own. That kind of thinking can be really dangerous, especially with something like a UTI that can turn into a kidney infection if it's not treated. The transportation issue is also a bigger deal than people realize. The Amish can't drive cars, so if you need to go to the doctor, you have to hire an English driver. We called them Amish taxis. These were non-Amish people who made money driving Amish folks around. You'd have to contact them ahead of time, usually by going to a phone shanty and leaving a message, then wait for them to call back, then arrange a time. It wasn't like you could just hop in your car and go when you felt bad. The whole process took planning and coordination. Now let's talk about the God's will part of your question, Margaret, because this is really important. The Amish do believe that everything happens according to God's will. That's a fundamental part of the faith. They believe in divine providence, which means that God is in control of everything, including sickness and health. But that doesn't mean they think they should never seek medical care. The way it was explained to me growing up was that God gave us wisdom and knowledge, and doctors are part of that. So going to a doctor isn't going against God's will, it's using the resources God provided. However, there's also this belief in accepting suffering as part of God's plan. So there's this tension between seeking help and accepting your circumstances. What I saw growing up was that people would pray a lot when someone was sick. They'd pray for healing, and they'd pray for guidance about whether to seek medical care. And sometimes people would interpret their own intuition or circumstances as God telling them what to do. If the person got better with home remedies, that was God's healing. If they got worse and ended up going to the doctor, that was God directing them to medical care. And if someone died despite medical care or without it, that was God's will too. But here's something that really bothered me, even when I was still Amish. Women's health issues specifically were often downplayed or ignored longer than they should have been. There was this attitude that women should just endure discomfort, that it was part of being a woman. So something like a UTI, which is painful and needs treatment, might be dismissed as not serious enough to worry about. I knew women who suffered with chronic UTIs because they kept trying to treat them naturally instead of getting antibiotics, and the infections would just keep coming back. There was also a lot of misinformation about health in my community. People would share remedies and advice that had no scientific basis, but everyone believed it because it came from someone they trusted. I remember women saying that UTIs were caused by not drinking enough water or by wearing tight clothing, which isn't entirely wrong, but they didn't understand the bacterial aspect of it. So they'd focus on prevention methods that didn't really work. Another thing that affected healthcare decisions was modesty. Amish culture is extremely modest, especially for women. The idea of going to a doctor and having to undress or be examined was really uncomfortable for a lot of women. Many preferred to see female doctors when possible, but those weren't always available, especially in rural areas. So some women would avoid going to the doctor just because they were embarrassed. I also want to mention that the Amish are generally more willing to seek medical care for acute, serious situations than for chronic issues or preventive care. So if someone had appendicitis or broke a bone or was in labor with complications, they'd go to the hospital. But regular checkups, mammograms, colonoscopies, that kind of preventive care just wasn't part of the culture. People went to the doctor when something was clearly wrong, not to make sure everything was okay. For children, it was similar. My parents took us to the doctor if we were seriously ill or injured, but we didn't go for regular well-child visits. We got some vaccines, but not all of them. The attitude was that kids get sick, that's normal, and their immune systems need to develop naturally, which, sounds reasonable until one of your siblings gets whooping cough and is sick for months. There were also some Amish folk healers and chiropractors that people would go to instead of regular doctors. Some of these people had legitimate training, but others just had a reputation in the community for being able to heal people. They'd do things like spinal adjustments, herbal treatments, or even some practices that seemed more like folk magic than medicine. My mom took me to a powwow doctor once when I had warts. He did this weird chant and made marks on my hand, and honestly, the warts did go away, but I think that was just coincidence. One more thing I need to mention is that when the Amish do go to doctors, they often have trouble following through with treatment plans. If a doctor prescribes a medication that needs to be taken for 10 days, some people would stop taking it after a few days once they felt better. Or if a doctor recommended follow-up appointments or physical therapy, those things might not happen because of the cost and transportation issues I mentioned earlier. So to directly answer Margaret's question, yes, the Amish do go to the doctor for illnesses like UTIs, but often not as quickly as they should, and not always with a full understanding of why the treatment is necessary. It's not usually because they think illness is God's will and shouldn't be treated. It's more about practical barriers like cost and transportation, cultural attitudes about healthcare and suffering, and a preference for natural remedies over modern medicine. From my perspective now, having been out of the Amish community for several years, I can see how some of these attitudes were actually harmful. Delaying medical care can turn minor problems into major ones. Relying only on natural remedies for things that need real medical treatment can be dangerous, and the lack of preventive care means that serious diseases like cancer often aren't caught until they're advanced. But I also understand where these attitudes come from. The Amish want to be separate from the world, and that includes not being dependent on modern systems like healthcare. They value self-sufficiency and community support. And there is something to be said for not running to the doctor for every little thing and trusting your body to heal itself sometimes. The problem is finding the balance, and I think a lot of Amish communities struggle with that. Some are getting better about it. I've heard that some communities now have regular health clinics that come to them, or they've worked out arrangements with local doctors to make care more accessible and affordable. But change is slow in the Amish world, and old attitudes die hard. If you're someone who works with or lives near Amish people, I think it's important to understand these barriers to healthcare and not judge. If an Amish person seems to be delaying necessary medical care, maybe offer to help them find affordable options or provide transportation. And if you're a healthcare provider treating Amish patients, take the time to explain things clearly and understand that they might have different perspectives on treatment. For me personally, leaving the Amish community meant getting used to a whole new way of thinking about healthcare. I got health insurance for the first time. I started going to the dentist regularly. I got caught up on vaccines. And honestly, it was overwhelming at first. But I also realized how many health issues I just lived with that didn't need to be problems. I'd had chronic sinus infections for years that cleared up with proper treatment. I found out I needed glasses, which explained why I'd struggled to see things at a distance my whole life. So yeah, the Amish do go to doctors, but it's complicated. Every community is different, every family is different, and people make different choices based on their circumstances and beliefs. There's no one simple answer, but I hope this gives you a better understanding of what goes on behind the scenes. If you have questions about the Amish or about my experience leaving the community, drop them in the comments below. I love hearing from you guys and answering your questions. It's actually really healing for me to talk about these things and help people understand. And Margaret, thank you so much for asking this question. It's an important one. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I post about Amish life, my journey after leaving, and answering your questions. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.